A teenage crash. 2 young lives lost. A controversial verdict. And now, a Netflix documentary bringing the entire case back into the spotlight. Why is everyone talking about Mackenzie Shirilla again? Section 1. The question at the heart of the crash. A late-night drive, a quiet road, then a sudden violent end. On July 31st, 2022, a car carrying 3 teenagers left a street in Strongsville, Ohio. It accelerated to 100 miles per hour. It did not brake. It did not swerve. It slammed into the brick wall of a commercial building. The impact was catastrophic. 2 passengers were killed instantly. Dominic Russo, Davion Flanagan. The driver, 17-year-old Mackenzie Shirilla, survived. From that moment, one question has dominated the story. Was this a tragic, unavoidable accident? Or was it something far more sinister? The story has become a modern parable about justice and intent. It forces us to confront uncomfortable possibilities. A young woman, barely an adult, at the center of an almost unimaginable event. Section 2. A night shattered, reconstructing the final moments. The night of the crash began, for many, like any other summer evening. Mackenzie, Dominic, Davion. Reports suggest Davion was recently introduced to the group. He was simply looking for a ride home. They were driving in the early hours, around 5:30 a.m., a time when the world is quiet and the roads are often empty. The location was the intersection of Progress and Alameda Drives, an area with commercial buildings and wide, curving streets. This setting would become the stage for the tragedy. The car, a 2018 Toyota Camry, was traveling along a route that Shirilla reportedly knew. Investigators pieced together the car's final journey meticulously. Surveillance video from a nearby business captured the vehicle's path. The footage is grainy, stark, and utterly chilling. It shows the Camry proceeding at a normal speed, then suddenly and inexplicably accelerating. The car leaves the paved road, drives across a landscaped area, and heads directly toward a large brick building. There is no sign of braking, no flicker of brake lights, no attempt to swerve or correct its course. The vehicle seems to follow a deliberate straight line from the road to the wall, a journey that took only a few seconds but ended 2 lives. The impact was immense. The car, traveling at an estimated 100 miles per hour, crumpled against the solid brick structure. First responders arrived to a scene of profound destruction. The front of the Camry was obliterated. Dominic Russo, in the front passenger seat, was pronounced dead at the scene. Davion Flanagan, in the back, was pronounced dead at the scene. Mackenzie Shirilla was found unconscious in the driver's seat, her foot still pressed on the accelerator. She was trapped in the wreckage, critically injured but alive. Rescuers had to carefully extricate her from the twisted metal before she could be airlifted to a hospital. In the immediate aftermath, the focus was on saving Shirilla's life. But as the sun rose over the debris field, the investigation began in earnest. Police officers, detectives, crash reconstruction experts, they measured skid marks, or, in this case, the lack thereof. They documented the car's trajectory. They collected every piece of physical evidence, from the mangled car parts to the personal belongings scattered by the force of the collision. Every detail was preserved, photographed, and catalogued. Section 3. The Silent Witnesses, Unpacking the Evidence. The investigation quickly moved beyond the physical crash site and into the digital and personal lives of those involved. One of the most powerful pieces of evidence was the surveillance video. Prosecutors would argue it showed a purposeful act. They pointed to the car's acceleration and the straight, unwavering path toward the building. To them, this was not the action of a driver who had lost control. A driver having a seizure or fainting could not maintain such a precise trajectory. The video, they claimed, was a silent witness to a deliberate, calculated crash. Then there were the cell phones. Our phones are diaries of our lives, and Mackenzie Shirilla's was no exception. Investigators recovered audio recordings and text messages showing a troubled relationship with Dominic Russo. Weeks before the crash, Shirilla was recorded on a friend's phone saying, "I will take all of you with me." In another instance, she allegedly threatened to drive her car into a tree. The prosecution presented these as evidence of premeditation. The defense offered a different interpretation. They argued the surveillance video was not as clear-cut. That condition can cause fainting and could have led her to slump onto the accelerator. They described the threats as hyperbolic teenage bravado, not a murder plan. Crash reconstruction experts became key players.
The prosecution's expert said steering inputs in the final seconds were too precise to be accidental. They argued subtle adjustments kept the car aimed at the building.
The defense argued reconstruction isn't an exact science. They pointed to possible variables: road conditions, tire integrity, the chaos of the moment. Ultimately, they suggested this was a terrible, unforeseen accident.
Section 4. The case for the prosecution, a deliberate act. The prosecution built its case methodically, brick by brick. They painted a portrait of Mackenzie Shirilla not as a grieving survivor, but as a cold and deliberate killer. The cornerstone of their argument was intent. This was not recklessness, but a planned event.
Prosecutor Michael O'Malley said it plainly. She had a mission. She executed it with precision.
Her mission, they argued, was to end her relationship with Dominic Russo in the most extreme way. Davian Flanagan was simply cargo, in the wrong place at the wrong time. Evidence of a volatile relationship established motive. Prosecutors presented a timeline of arguments and threats. One fight, she allegedly threatened to key Russo's car. Another, she sent abusive text messages. The most damning evidence were audio recordings of her threats to crash. Prosecutors told the court these were not idle words, but a declaration of intent. They tied those threats to the final, fatal drive. The prosecution leaned on crash reconstruction.
Experts pointed to the car's data recorder. They also pointed to surveillance footage.
Both showed a pattern inconsistent with an accident. The car accelerated smoothly and powerfully.
The steering wheel made minute adjustments to stay on course.
There was no panic braking, no last-second swerve. To them, it read like a confession in tire tracks and engine data.
An unconscious person could not have driven with that precision.
It was the work of a fully conscious, determined driver. Finally, they examined Shirilla's behavior after the crash. In the hospital, she expressed grief and love for Dominic Russo. Investigators found inconsistencies in her story. They noted a lack of remorse. The defense team faced the monumental task of countering a narrative that was both emotionally powerful and seemingly supported by technical evidence, and their strategy was to dismantle the prosecution's case by inserting doubt at every turn. They began by humanizing Mackenzie Shirilla, presenting her not as a monster, but as a teenager who had survived an unspeakable trauma and was now being wrongfully accused. They argued that the prosecution was twisting a tragic accident into a crime because they needed someone to blame for the heartbreaking loss of two young men. A key element of the defense was Shirilla's medical history. Her diagnosis of POTS became a potential explanation for a sudden loss of consciousness. They argued that a syncopal episode or fainting spell could explain why she would slump forward, pressing the accelerator, and become unresponsive at the wheel. This would account for the lack of braking and the steady acceleration. The defense sought to create an alternative, non-criminal explanation for the car's bizarre behavior after a 4-day bench trial where a judge, not a jury, would decide the facts. The moment of judgment arrived. Judge Nancy Margaret Russo, no relation to the victim, delivered her verdict in a courtroom heavy with anticipation. She systematically went through the evidence, piece by piece, addressing the prosecution's arguments, addressing the defense's counterpoints. She spoke of the surveillance video, the expert testimony, the digital evidence recovered from the cell phones. Her tone was somber as she acknowledged the profound loss suffered by the families of Dominic Russo and Davian Flanagan. The verdict was guilty. Judge Russo concluded that Mackenzie Shirilla had acted purposefully.
In her ruling, she stated, "This was not a case of reckless driving. This was a murder."
She methodically dismissed the defense's theory of a medical emergency, stating that Shirilla's actions behind the wheel were too controlled and deliberate to be accidental. She referred to the drive as a mission of death, echoing the prosecution's language. Shirilla, who had been out on bond, was immediately taken into custody. She was convicted on multiple counts, including murder, and faced a mandatory sentence of life in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. The reaction in the courtroom was immediate and visceral. Shirilla broke down in tears as the verdict was read. Her family and supporters were overcome with shock and grief. On the other side of the room, the families of Dominic and Davion embraced, finding a measure of justice in the judge's words, though it could never undo their loss. The verdict drew a firm legal line under the case, officially labeling the event not as an accident. For the court system, the matter was settled. The question had been asked, and the answer was guilty. In the months and years that followed, the case began to fade from the national headlines, as such cases often do. The legal appeals process moved forward quietly in the background. The families were left to navigate their new reality, 2 families mourning their sons, and 1 family fighting for their daughter's freedom. The town of Strongsville began to heal, though the scars of the event remained. The story of the crash became a local tragedy, a cautionary tale whispered in the community, but the intense public debate that had surrounded the trial grew quiet. The silence, however, was temporary. Years after the verdict, the case of Mackenzie Shirilla was thrust back into the international spotlight. A documentary appeared on Netflix, often titled The Crash, or Dead End Drive. Using the classic true crime formula, the series re-examined the entire story from the beginning. It featured interviews with friends, family members, legal experts, journalists. It used dramatic reenactments, slow-motion surveillance footage, and a haunting musical score to build suspense and emotion. Suddenly, a case settled in a local Ohio court was being retried in the court of global public opinion. The power of a platform like Netflix cannot be overstated. With millions of subscribers worldwide, a featured documentary can make a case go viral overnight. The story had elements that captivate true crime audiences. A young, ordinary protagonist, a shocking crime, a controversial motive, lingering questions about evidence. The documentary presented these in a polished narrative, inviting viewers to become armchair detectives. The platform gave the story reach beyond traditional news, and the debate was reignited with force. Almost immediately, social media platforms like TikTok, Reddit were flooded with discussion. Hashtags like ties Mackenzie Shirilla. Viewers dissected every frame of the surveillance video, debated the POTS diagnosis, scrutinized Shirilla's behavior. Many viewers believed a terrible injustice occurred, thinking the evidence wasn't strong enough for a murder conviction. They saw a troubled teenager railroaded by the system. Through editing and narrative focus, the documentary planted seeds of reasonable doubt in millions. This phenomenon, the Netflix effect, has profound implications. It can shine light on miscarriages of justice and bring attention to forgotten cases. But it can simplify legal arguments, favor emotional storytelling, and fuel intense public pressure campaigns. The Mackenzie Shirilla documentary did exactly that, creating a vocal movement of supporters who believe she is innocent, standing in stark opposition to the families of the victims and the legal system that convicted her. Should convicted criminals become famous through documentaries and social media? The debate continues. Was it an accident, or was it murder? The resurgence of the Mackenzie Shirilla case leaves us in a complicated and familiar place in the modern media landscape. We are left with 2 competing narratives: the legal narrative, the popular narrative. The legal narrative, a judge who heard all the evidence and concluded beyond a reasonable doubt that Shirilla committed murder. This narrative is backed by the full weight of the justice system. The popular narrative is shaped by a documentary and amplified by social media. It suggests she is a victim of a system that rushed to judgment. This division highlights a growing tension between our institutions and the media that scrutinizes them. True crime documentaries can be a powerful force for good, exposing flaws and forcing accountability. But they are also entertainment products, crafted to hold a viewer's attention and evoke an emotional response. They are not bound by the same rules of evidence as a court of law. Selective presentation of facts, the use of emotional music, the focus on sympathetic characters. As viewers, we are often consuming a story, not a legal transcript. For the families involved, this renewed debate is undoubtedly painful. The families of Dominic Russo, the families of Davian Flanagan. They must endure seeing Shirilla portrayed as a victim, a narrative they fought against in court. Conversely, Shirilla's family and supporters, who have always maintained her innocence, see the documentary as a vehicle for the truth they believe in, a chance to rally public support for her appeals. The media spotlight intensifies the pain and passion on all sides. Ultimately, the Mackenzie Shirilla case forces us to ask a fundamental question about the nature of truth in the 21st century. When a legal verdict is rendered, is the story over? Or is it simply the beginning of a new chapter, one to be endlessly debated, re-edited, and relitigated on screens around the world? The Netflix documentary did not introduce new evidence that could exonerate Shirilla in a court of law. Instead, it created a new jury of millions, armed with incomplete information and powerful narratives. As we consume these stories, we too become part of the process. And so the question remains, hanging in the air long after the credits roll, where does the real truth lie? The Mackenzie Shirilla case remains one of the most debated crash cases in recent memory. And thanks to Netflix, the conversation is far from over. Do documentaries reveal the truth or shape the story? A teenage crash, 2 young lives lost, a controversial verdict, and now, a Netflix documentary bringing the entire case back into the spotlight. Why is everyone talking about Mackenzie Shirilla again?